I'm Rebecca Pan, the host of Badass Women in Climate, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Amanda Moran. She is the foundations and grants director of Amazon Watch, which is so cool. They support initiatives in the Amazon, especially around Indigenous communities. And she's a native San Franciscan, a mom, and an ethical vegan. So I'm excited to talk about what that means. But yeah, defending and protecting the Amazon rainforest. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's really great to be here. I'm very honored to be considered a badass woman in climate.
Oh my God. You are definitely a badass woman in climate. And we met at SOCAP, which is, for those who don't know, I don't remember what the acronym stands for. Socially
conscious investing, but I'm not exactly sure about the acronym.
Yeah, it is an impact investing conference that happens every year here in San Francisco. And actually, the past president was a member here at Trellis.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, Lindsay Smalling.
Nice.
But I'm curious to hear from you. What got you into climate work?
So, back when I was pretty little, I always had a strong sense of justice. And when I was young, I could see that even then, in the 70s, that our capitalistic way of consuming so much in our culture really was problematic. That was the earliest thing that I can remember, forcing my family to recycle and, going with my mom to the recycling center down on Ashby in Berkeley. And that was the kind of young momentum toward working on climate. And I had also at that time a lot of fear about environmental apocalypse as a young person. And I was really convinced that our world was not going to survive past the year 2000. If it wasn't sort of a nuclear war scenario, then it probably was going to be toxic environment that would kill everyone.
So you had some visibility into this earlier than a lot of people.
Yeah, I was quite dialed at that age, but I was wrong. I was glad to be wrong. That
we're still here,
and yeah,
we've still really messed stuff up,
right?
Very,
exactly.
very badly,
right? And it's pretty toxic, but people are still surviving, and there is still some biodiversity that can be protected.
And how I know. So I want you to tell me everything about Amazon Watch and your work there. And I'm really curious about your kind of like, if there was a defining moment that happened, something happened that you were like, I gotta get back into climate resilience support, or...
You mean recently?
Yes.
Well, I kind of want to answer that question by going further back because it makes more sense if you think about it this way. So 2 things happened to me as a young person. One was my mom went to a funeral on the East Coast in 1979 in March. And at that time, her friend came to stay with us. And her friend, it turned out, was on the Energy Commission of California. So she normally lived in Sacramento, and she came down to the Bay to stay with us. And during the time that she was staying with us, the 3 Mile Island disaster happened. And because I don't know what that is. 3 Mile Island?
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 Mile Island was a nuclear power plant in rural Pennsylvania, but not far from Philadelphia.
Okay.
And it almost melted down and became sort of a huge event in terms of the ending nuclear power.
This was in 79?
Yeah, in the United States. So it was, there was already a really strong anti-nuclear movement, but it was really galvanized at that moment. And it marked the time where in the United States, reactors started to get decommissioned and there was less popular support for nuclear power. So, but it was a big catastrophe. It was along the lines of what, later happened in Chernobyl, but didn't happen here, fortunately. And it also is located on a river, the Susquehanna River.
Yeah.
And
I'm from Philly.
Oh.
But I was born in 80. So this had just happened, but I was much too young to be aware of it at the time. Yeah, right on the Susquehanna River. That's wow.
So, but anyway, this climate expert scientist was staying with us, and so what probably would not have been on my radar was then on my radar in a big way. And every day she was looking at the news and she was breaking it all down for us and explaining how nuclear power worked and why this was a really huge threat to the environment. And she was clearly quite afraid, and also then talked about some of the dangers in California. So that was kind of the first defining moment for me in terms of climate. And then later, I was doing some human rights advocacy work around indigenous displacement of the Navajo in Arizona. So this was more maybe like 10 years later in the 80s. And I went to the Navajo reservation with the American Indian movement. They had an encampment there for indigenous rights. And the thing that I saw immediately, this is tying back into what Amazon Watch does, was that these Navajo, many of whom did not speak English, that's how remote they were. They only spoke Dene, Navajo language. They were essentially protecting the biodiversity of a massive part of Arizona called Black Mesa, Big Mountain. And with the coal company coming in and displacing them through a very dubious legal loophole, that land was then being opened up for coal, and they ended up being displaced, and it was a big, terrible catastrophe environmentally for that area.
Yeah.
But I saw firsthand how indigenous people protect biodiversity essentially just by being themselves and doing what they've done for thousands of years. And so those were the two things I think in my history that were defining moments.
Yeah.
More recently, I was really ready to get out of the arts. I had just felt like my time in the arts as an arts proponent and administrator was kind of just done. And I felt like now is the time, right? It almost feels like a tipping point right now in terms of climate.
Yeah.
And that it was really almost like an organic push inside of me to move back.
Yeah, so it was kind of in your blood or in your upbringing and your value system, and you pursued the arts for a long time.
Yep.
And then decided, all right, now's the moment. That makes a lot of sense. I was curious because you've done so much in the arts, and this seems like a big shift away from that.
Part of my role as a fundraiser and as a person that looks for resources for different kinds of projects, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Fundraisers often change sectors. So we would do that kind of work in lots of different contexts. And so it was
a lot of that transfers.
Exactly. Like those skills are translatable from sector to sector.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think about I just got into climate during the pandemic.
Oh, interesting.
My smoke alarm went off. This was my defining moment. My smoke alarm went off at 3 a.m. during the wildfires here in San Francisco.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was really intense. My son was woken up and he's like, "Mama, that's what he calls me. My throat hurts. What's happening?" And it was just a light bulb moment where I was like, climate change is in my house. It is not something I can ignore or focus on it. It became an all-consuming focus. So I rededicated Trellis, this co-working space, to climate resilient, to being a home base for climate resilience. And yeah, I'm like, everybody's got to do their part so that we can live to fight another day. So I totally get that. And I've brought my, transferable skills, whatever those are, to shifting to the climate fight.
Yeah, that's so amazing.
Thank you. Do you feel like you are optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in the middle? realistic? What's your take on the mess we've gotten ourselves into?
I think I'm a realistic optimist.
Okay.
I have real hopes for the humankind. I am admittedly quite discouraged by recent turns of events around the election and what's going to happen. And one of the things that we've seen at Amazon Watch, where we work in part on finance campaigns. Mm-hmm. So we work to make sure that destructive projects in the Amazon don't get financed. So we pressure the banks with different leverage points, specifically getting our Indigenous partners to literally talk to them and getting the Indigenous partners in the room with the banks. And one of the discouraging signs that we've seen is that the banks are not only jettisoning their climate policies, but also their DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion policies, which means potentially there's some blowback in terms of their human rights commitments and what they see as it's okay for us to invest in projects that are going to cause a lot of destruction, which over the last 20 years have been a lot of pressure and momentum building to get them to reduce their investments in destructive projects. So that's discouraging. But again, me as an optimist, I feel, especially, since we met up at that SOCAP space and a lot of the socially conscious investing, there's definitely room for the tech sector to come in and maybe work some of its magic. I mean, I hold out hope for that. Mm-hmm. A lot of the activists that I work with at Amazon Watch are really skeptical about any kind of tech solution to the climate crisis, especially since the mindset of tech is kind of what got us partly into this problem area that we're in now. That said, I am a humanist and I believe in grassroots movements and activism, and great change has occurred as a result of people getting together and raising their voices.
Yeah, I feel all of that. The shift to we need more masculine energy in the workforce comments and buying a presidency, and just, I mean, it's wild, the kind of blowback from people pushing for the world to be fairer and for people to be like, no, it's too fair, you went too far, we need it to be less fair, is appalling and just so heartbreaking. Tell me more about Amazon Watch. Tell me about your programs and whatever you want to tell me. It's such an inspiring organization.
Oh, that's so cool. It really is inspiring. It's pretty amazing from the inside to, get to work, do this work. So we work to protect and defend the Amazon in partnership with Indigenous peoples. And part of the logic there is that, sort of like what happened at Big Mountain, Indigenous peoples conserve biodiversity just through their way of life and the fact that they've honed practices to steward territory, things that I don't totally understand, but ways of sort of curating forests so that the forests remain healthy. Mm-hmm. And the statistics around that are pretty shocking. Like around the world, the majority of the remaining biodiversity and the healthy intact forests are in Indigenous territories. So working that logic backwards, you can see that supporting Indigenous communities and helping them rebuild economic revitalization, agroecology projects, and be socially healthy and economically healthy is really important in terms of supporting sustaining forests.
Yeah.
So we do that in a number of different ways. We're really an activist organization. We're very grassroots, and we work on the campaign level. So campaigns are like picking a target and then doing everything that we can to kind of change the trajectory of the target. Like right now we have the End Amazon Crude campaign, mm-hmm. which is about, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of crude oil comes out of the Amazon, particularly the Ecuadorian Amazon. And the shocking statistic is that 1/9 of all of that ends up in our gas tanks. So even like today, when you're driving your car, there's a chance that like 1 gallon of your gas is from the Ecuadorian rainforest.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's because of the trade routes, it's easy to import oil from Ecuador, probably easier to get it here than from Saudi Arabia. And so the Ecuadorians export to California. So we've been working on that supply chain to influence California to stop importing from Ecuador, to discourage the Ecuadorians, by a lot of different kind of measures through social pressure, through press and media, through the investment angle. And then also in Peru, we've been working, the state oil company, it's called Petro Peru, has this aging, terrifying pipeline that goes from the Amazon across the Andes Mountains and out to the ocean, where they just built a huge refinery. There was a big oil spill there 2 years ago, right on the coast outside of Lima. So there was a lot of popular resistance and shock at how oil could soil the beaches outside of Lima. But what people don't know is that pipeline's been breaking literally hundreds of breaks through the jungle, over the mountains. I mean, it's terrifying.
Oh my God.
So we've been working to pressure the banks not to put a new infusion of money into Petro Peru. And we've also been doing a lot of work for probably close to 20 years with the indigenous territory communities that live in the territories where the oil blocks are in the Amazon.
So what is, I mean, at the end of the day, in a capitalist society, so much comes down to money. So what are the alternatives and that Ecuadorians can pursue? Is there, and then does Amazon Watch do any of that type of support to kind of redirect efforts and energy?
So it's a complex question. There are a myriad of individual situations in different countries. And of course, we work in 4 countries in Latin America, and they have really diverse politics and economics in each of those places. But in general, we talk about what's called a just transition. And it's a transition away from fossil fuels that takes into account the needs of indigenous communities, communities of color, under-resourced communities, like when we think about the Gulf South and all of the environmental racism that goes on in places where fossil fuel extraction is taking place.
Oh, environmental racism. Let's put a pin in that. I want to go back to that.
Let's kill it forever. Yeah, so a just transition is one in which takes into account the needs of those communities, while also taking into the factor, that the companies do want to make money. The countries have to make money. What is Ecuador going to do if they're not pumping a lot of oil out of the rainforest? What's interesting is that countries like Colombia had their current president has pledged, and who knows what is going to happen when he's out of office, but he's pledged to no longer invest in fossil fuels in order to make money for Colombia. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, he set a precedent for countries. Unfortunately, again, with the shift toward the corporate mindset in the United States and the push toward more fossil fuel extraction, that it looks like our current government or incoming government is going, I am hoping that's not going to be influential to other governments around the world, but we have to predict that it will be.
Yeah.
But so just transition, it feels like to me there's a lot of talk in the environmental and climate movement around just transition, but I don't see a lot of action toward it yet. So I feel like philanthropy and, government and academics are thinking a lot about it, but we're not really seeing on the ground what that translates to yet.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that Amazon Watch does, to get back to Amazon Watch, that I think is just amazing, is we have something called the Amazon Defenders Fund. And so it's about 20 to 30% of our budget. So right now our budget's about $5 million. So we give away $1 million a year. We invest in all kinds of projects across the Amazon, all kinds of communities. And sometimes that investment looks like, an activist needs surgery, doesn't have health insurance, and that activist is really important to one of our campaigns. Mm-hmm. And so we'll pay $1,000 to get that person to the nearest city in the hospital and pay for some care and some, childcare for their kid while they're, away, and that kind of thing. Like, it's very hands-on and very direct. Yeah. And that's unusual. Like, a lot of solidarity funds don't work at that level of partnership. Mm-hmm. So that's like the very personal kinds of support mm-hmm. that we give our activist partners on the ground. And then we do things like invest in agroecology projects. So for communities, for instance, that one of the trends that we've been tracking really closely is the rise of criminal economies mm-hmm. in the rainforest, and how those are sometimes, not always, but sometimes a front for corporate entities that want to come in and exploit. Mm. So for instance, an oil company will hire some, ex-commandos to threaten and intimidate a community so they can come in with their equipment, build a road, build a mine, whatever that they have in mind for that mm-hmm. community. And we're seeing it happen more and more. So part of our work is there another pathway for youth that they don't have to be co-opted by a gang? They've got other ways to make money. They've got training. They've got solar power in their community, so they can, work toward an education, have access to stuff online. So there's a really broad range of things that we fund. And again, like I said, it's a tiny fund, but sometimes those things can really make a difference.
Yeah. I wonder if any of your work behaves as kind of like a demonstration site or a pilot that other organizations look at as like, oh, Amazon Watch did that thing that was really successful. We should all, jump on board and follow that same model. Does that happen across the kind of philanthropy landscape?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes our funders ask us to cite replicable projects, which I think is great, though it sort of simplifies things, just because, again, like I said, there's such a diversity of communities, and we're also working in multiple languages. Mm. So of course we're dominant languages, Spanish, English, and Portuguese, but then there's also all the indigenous languages as well. And a lot of people don't speak Spanish. So when we think about that, sometimes, yes, it's replicable and sometimes it's not. But I did want to bring up a recent project, because you asked me earlier in the questions, like, what was one thing I was really proud of? Yeah. And one of the things that we did through our fund was I personally fundraised about $100,000 for a project that is super exciting. It's a solar project. And if you can picture the geography of Peru, sort of eastern Peru towards the Brazilian border, is a region called Ucayali. And Ucayali is a river that runs north-south and through the rainforest. And there's a lot of communities along this river. And this area is very remote. And there's been a lot of the criminal economies in terms of logging in particular, illegal gold mining. And the communities have been really overrun. And not only that, but there's no electricity. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we raised all this money, and we are doing a solar installation in 15 of the communities there. And so now they'll have the capacity to not only broadcast threats, but also call in the authorities to combat the illegal activity happening in their territories.
That's great.
Yeah.
And did that come up as an intervention that the indigenous communities that you were talking to were asking for? Or was it something Amazon Watch was watching and or saw somewhere else, and that it really improved reduction of criminal activity? How did it come to?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like about a third of our team of 25 is in South America, so they're in the communities a lot, and they see on the ground, and are talking to the leaders that we work with to find out what their needs are. And so we started doing solar installations in 2017. And the solar installation, they're very strategic in terms of we choose which communities we want to, and the communities, of course, ask which ones are strongest in resisting certain extractive projects, and can we partner with them and raise the funds to get the solar installed there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then after you do a project like that, is it a continue? Is it kind of like, okay, we did that, now let's focus on this other thing, or is it we did that, now let's amplify the impact of that work? How do you guys think about because you're saying like you have to be so laser focused.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Okay, so I think about it this way, and I really admire and respect Amazon Watch's what we call a theory of change, which I kind of hate that term, but we partner for the long term. And when you're thinking about working with a community that historically has been colonially exploited, since colonial times, there's a lot of mistrust. And so a global North organization coming in can continue those exploitative relationships. And a lot of big NGOs do. We've seen that happen where Indigenous territories, like people are literally kicked off their land so that conservation can happen. And we don't work on that model. We work on a long-term model. So for instance, once the solar is installed in the community, it's not like we move on to the next project. We're there for the long term. We're monitoring the system. We're helping troubleshoot over, a very long period of time. And because the relationships of trust take a long time to build, we're not looking to expand necessarily. We're looking to deepen. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm curious, you were saying that you work in 4 countries, multiple languages, and you're a small team with a limited budget. So that makes me curious about, I know that Amazon stretches across 4 countries. So
actually 9 countries.
Across 9 countries? Okay, so then my question is, why spread yourself so far and not stick to, the one plate like Colombia that has made this pledge, where maybe you could, your efforts could go even further with even more focus. But then I'm sure you see like, well, we got to fix it. Like we have to fix it wherever we can.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, I'll answer it this way. Part of what Amazon Watch's unique skill set is also media and communications to a global North audience. So, it's sort of funny, but Amazon Watch works with what we call artists for Amazonia. So it's like any kind of artist that wants to support, like Mark Ruffalo's been a really huge supporter, musicians, actors, and they've, done different kinds of campaigns and stuff alongside us. Martin Sheen narrated our 25th anniversary
amazing
video, which was really great. But so that's part of our skill set. And so we can use that to broadcast news about the entire Amazon. And because it's a complex ecosystem that spans all those different nation states, as well as all the different Indigenous communities, it's hard to pick one geographic location to work on. And that's just like historically how we've worked. It's like a community has come to us and said, can you help us resist this dam?
Yeah.
We hadn't worked in Brazil before the Belo Monte Dam in 2011. And then that's when Amazon Watch started working in Brazil, was when the community came to us and was like, can you help us resist this dam?
So you are a known quantity there. When did Amazon Watch start?
It was founded in 1996.
Okay. So you've got time where you've built up the trust, and communities are aware of you. And so when they come to you, it's hard to say no because it's exactly in your wheelhouse. So you just kind of make it work. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that's a struggle that a lot of nonprofits have is how to constrain the work, because we are, in generally, people that work at nonprofits our hearts are open and we want to solve whatever problem is coming to us.
Right.
So to be more efficient and more effective, especially, my team, the fundraising team, we're often looking at things at that angle because we have to translate how we're thinking about all this work strategically to an outside audience and pitch it effectively. Yeah.
And how do you, as a fundraiser, how do you think about the projects and the best use of your time to raise the most funds, to have the most impact? I would imagine, you could be working all the time. You could be, but of course then you'd burn out and then you can't do this work anymore. And I know a lot of people in the nonprofit world do burn out because they're just so committed to the cause and then lose their way. So how do you take care of yourself and also think about, I know I'm going off my list.
No, it's good. I actually have a good answer for that. And it's not going to be what you think.
Okay.
I personally believe in totally gut feeling, intuition. And that's partly how I structure my day, which is very weird because mostly you would say you have to have a plan of action and, block your time. And yes, you have to do that. But with fundraising, I often feel like, oh, I need to call so-and-so. And then I do it. And sometimes those things are really effective. One of our board members,
I love that.
And our old director of philanthropy was a philanthropic advisor. She's just really a great thinker. And one of the things that she always said was a good fundraiser needs to be relaxed and not in a hurry and not pressured. Because how can you convince someone else to invest in your thing if you're frantic and feeling, like always under the gun of this crisis? So there has to be a way that we're good spokespeople and we have the longer term vision always there. So even working back a step from that in terms of the burnout piece, because on a daily basis, we're getting reports of people's villages burned, of mining barges pulling up to people's, communities and unloading equipment. And, literally somebody's kids were swimming in the river and got killed by the miners that came in, just like that. And we, like I said, those reports are coming in daily, and we're proximate to a lot of suffering, a lot of chaos and fear. And for me personally, I'm a little bit removed from it as a fundraiser, but it's still there. And I'll have to hold crying colleagues often. That is often what we're dealing with. And our suffering, of course, as Global North people is, nothing compared to what our partners are facing. But I do feel the need for me, have a really strong personal spiritual practice. And that's part of why I wrote the thing about being an ethical vegan, because I'm really committed to keeping my own, that's my own kind of private climate activism resistance moment, is where you can look at, of course, the agriculture and big agriculture and factory farming are huge parts of climate catastrophe. And it was explained to me maybe 25 years ago, if you stop eating meat, you're eating lower down on the food chain. There's more food for everybody, and it's much better for the environment. And I was like, wow, if I'm an environmental activist, then that's what I need to do to keep my own ethics in place, and like my yoga teacher said, 3 times a day you have a chance to choose peace and nonviolence. And that really resonated with me.
Oh,
so that's part of my own personal practice. And I know other environmentalists who feel strongly that veganism is a really important pathway for resistance. But other people don't, and I don't judge anybody, for their own choices. So I just want to make that clear. But I found that for me, it felt really good to be able to make that choice when I sit down for dinner to reinforce, like, yeah, this is what I believe in. And I don't believe any other creatures should be suffering so I can have dinner,
And you're not eating as much food that is inflammatory.
That's true.
Which
probably
keeps you calmer.
Sugar. Yeah. So, but all that to say that I have to do a lot of spiritual practice to kind of bookend our work. And that's what makes it manageable for me. I do not know how my colleagues who don't have like a really strong spiritual practice, like I meditate, I do yoga, I keep a good diet. I try to really like keep reasonable hours with my work so that I can rebuild and refresh and renew so that I can, like you said earlier, live to fight another day. But that's also part of where I feel like there's a lot of optimism and hope is I'm also a yoga teacher. And so if you study the ancient scriptures of yoga and of Buddhism as well, probably Christianity, but I haven't really studied those scriptures, so I don't know. But the scripture is responding to the human condition, which is very violent, very chaotic, very scary. And the scripture is basically saying, you guys gotta like be less violent, like non-violence. And it's right there in the 10 Commandments too. And that to me is an indicator that those times were also really intense for people, right? That the fact that those were the scriptures that survived is the ones that are telling you, like, be nonviolent, don't take more than you need, tell the truth. Like all those things are pretty much codified across the board in all the different religions. So it's not like a new problem, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think technically we are less violent now than we've ever been before, even though social media and the news paint a different picture because that's how you get engagement and clicks and all, if you've got 15 puppies and 1 cobra, you're going to focus on the cobra.
Right?
And that is just how we're wired to survive. So the bad gets the focus, and all of the good and nonviolence that's happening just doesn't get the airtime. I worry about that with this podcast, actually, because I'm like, I'm not talking about how horrible everything is all the time. And I know that will be worse for engagement, but I don't care because I want an optimism. Like, this is a place to highlight badass women's voices and the incredible work that is happening around the world that maybe is harder to hear or find because it's not going to get, as many clicks as a cobra.
Well, and along those lines, one of the things that we do at Amazon Watch is champion women's voices. And there are Indigenous women doing the work of, just extraordinary work. I think of Alessandra Manduruku in Brazil. She won the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2023. And she is, the funny thing about the Goldman Prize is that it's a prize awarded to an individual. But what we know in social movements is that no one person ever creates a movement. So there's a whole community behind each one of these leaders. But these women speak out at great risk to their own personal health and in often situations of great danger. But Alessandra has stood up to Anglo-American mining company, keeping them out of the territory. Right now she's taking on something called the Ferrograu, which is a proposed grain railway through Munduruku territory. It's sort of interesting because as progress, meaning, the agricultural slash and burn marches westward through the Brazilian Amazon, there are these stands of still very preserved forests, and her territory along the Tapajós River happens to be one of those places. And so they're fiercely resisting the encroachment of agribusiness and the grain railway that they want to make through. So it's pretty inspiring to work with her. We've also been working really closely with a leader in Peru named Olivia Bisa, and her people, the Chopra people, have been resisting the state oil company, Petroperu, and she's the first female leader elected to lead the Chopra. And awesome. Her story is so incredible. Like, she was married off at age 13. She escaped that marriage a few years later, ran away. First woman of her nation to get a college degree. And then she went on and got a law degree and came back to the community and is the president and is leading huge and fierce resistance to the oil company. And, getting death threats all the time. Talk about badass women. Wow, amazing.
I would love, so we had, the way we're set up to do this podcast, where you and I are, is our two-seater in-person setup. But we also have over there off camera a one-person remote setup.
Oh, cool.
And we're just getting to the point where that one's ready to go as well. So it won't have, right now it needs to be people in the Bay Area because that's where we are. But shortly, I think next month, it will be able to be anywhere in the world. And I would love introductions to Badass Women in Climate that are not white women, because you're now my third guest and you're my third white woman. So I love, and as a white woman as well, like we're doing something, but there's so many faces and colors and origins that I really want to represent as well. So love
awesome.
your help finding.
I would love.
Is there, you worked on something else that was super cool that I wanted to ask you about. Citizens for a Better Environment.
Oh. Okay.
I did not know that Silicon Valley had poisoned drinking water. Tell me.
Okay, this is a fascinating story. Okay, so Citizens for a Better Environment is now called, I think it's Communities for a Better Environment. So it's still around. And at that time in the 80s, their mandate was to enforce laws that were already in place and make sure that local governments and corporations and whatnot were complying with the law. So it was a pretty good strategy. I don't know if that's still their strategy, but basically somebody came to my door. I was a teenager. They knocked on my door, and this guy had such an incredible rap. Like, he was smart. And I was like, I want to do what that guy does. And he was basically giving me this whole rundown on the spraying of the state of California with something called malathion to combat the gypsy moth. This is like all these weird pockets of California history. And so I was really impressed with him. I got that job, basically going door to door, fundraising. And one of the things we did was that when we went door to door, we would ask people, do you have any environmental problems in your area? And then we had a little form that they could fill out. So one of the things that we were working on then was poison drinking water. And so I brought that up. I was in Sunnyvale, which is, I think Sunnyvale's in Santa Clara County. And Santa Clara County, people don't know this, has the most Superfund sites of the entire nation. You know what a Superfund site is?
I do, but maybe you could explain.
Okay, so it's
listeners that don't know.
Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, designates places that are so toxic and poisonous that they require Superfunds to clean up. And the majority of the highest concentration of them are in Santa Clara County. Also the home, I think, of Apple and Google and Facebook and whatnot. So basically, semiconductor companies had underground storage tanks of solvents that leaked into the groundwater table. And that was IBM, Fairchild Semiconductor, and Intel were three of the biggest polluters.
Oh my goodness.
Is crazy. And there's cancer clusters specifically in parts of the South Bay because of this. So basically what happened was I went to this guy's door and knocked on the door, give my little rap, and then I hand him the form. I said, you got any environmental problems that you want to, somebody to take a look at? He said, yeah, my water. I said, oh, what's going on with your water? He said, let me show you. And he poured this, turn on the tap. This glass of water came out that I can only describe as one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. It was gray, muddy, and it had these weird webs in it. Like, I do not know what that was. And he's like, yeah, this is our water. It was shocking. So the scary thing is that a lot of those manufacturing processes for technology companies have now been exported into developing nations where even the environmental regulations are probably laxer than they were here. So,
and here it was enormously polluting and contaminating.
Yeah, so it's pretty scary. I mean, that's also why I'm skeptical about tech as a solution, just because we may burn ourselves out before that's even potential to make an impact. But
you don't think we should try to get ourselves to Mars?
We may not have a choice. I don't know.
So I have a last question. It's a two-parter. You can answer one or both parts. But for people that are interested in getting into climate, that hear this podcast and they're like, all right, it's my time. I'm gonna join the climate movement. Do you have a tip for where they start?
So first of all, I think that anything that calls our interest is where we're going to be most sort of focused, right? Mm. So for me, I love to think about local stuff. And I love the local green space, San Bruno Mountain, which is just south of here, above the San Francisco airport. And there's actually nobody knows this, but there are Ohlone shell mounds on that mountain. There's endangered species on that mountain. It's a really beautiful place to hike. So I like supporting local organizations that do, like that organization, San Bruno Mountain Watch. They do so much on a $500,000 budget, and they are holding that mountain as an open green space. It's pretty remarkable.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then of course, if you're drawn to things like Amazon Watch, and we work on an international scale, but we also work on issues in California. We work on, Chevron, it's like a huge toxic refinery in Richmond, and they've been one of the biggest CO2 producers in the state of California. So we work locally as well. So come to the Amazon Watch website, support our social media streams, become a donor. We have a lot of actions that you can take online if that is something you're, like an armchair activist. And we need every level of activists, right? For me personally, I love a good protest. So there's something in the Bay Area called the Oil and Gas Action Network.
Okay.
And they stage protests, and they're super scrappy activists, and they're amazing. I'm a donor to the Oil and Gas Action Network, and I love them. And they have, they list local protests all the time. You can go protest at the Chevron refinery. I think it's this weekend, actually. It's part of sort of a weekend of protest around the inauguration of Trump, and also to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. There's a lot of big actions happening this weekend. So I think actually getting your feet on the ground and going to a protest, there's nothing like it. Just getting with another group of people that are yelling. Is it going to make real change? I don't know, but it sure feels good to me to shout and march. So I encourage anybody.
I love that.
If you've never been to a protest, it's amazing.
I have never been to a protest.
We're going to go protest again.
Let's protest. I remember my last question.
Okay.
Which was, what is a tip or something that people can do, just an easy everyday tip to be a little bit gentler on our planet?
Okay, so I'm going to push back on this because the idea of the carbon footprint was something that corporations co-opted to make people feel like the individual person is responsible for this climate problem. We're not. Of course we are in a bigger sense. Everybody's responsible. But I think more importantly, we need to hold our corporations and governments accountable for the real harm that our capitalist consumption is doing on a much broader scale. So I just want to put that in context.
Yeah.
I did say, I know I'm full of contradictions here, but I did say that for me, veganism is a really huge part. And you don't have to go 100% vegan. You can do vegetarian meals like 3-4 times a week. And it makes a big difference in terms of, over time, what our food consumption and system looks like.
Yeah, because if there's less demand, there's going to be less corporations that are trying to capitalize on demand. Yeah.
And we're very, especially those of us living in the cities, we're very removed from the byproducts of our food system and how it pollutes communities. Communities that live adjacent to factory farms are some of the most toxic places and really don't have a say because in particular, our food system is considered, a core, something that the government needs to defend. And so there's very little leverage to get cleanup around factory farms. But we forget
if we could use the government subsidies that go to corn and big ag, we could, I can't remember what it was, like $5.7 trillion or something in annual subsidies and what we need to tip the scale for climate resilience is like 3 trillion. Like that could make such a huge difference. Drives me crazy.
Yeah, it does drive you crazy. But the diet thing I think is key just because it's such a simple shift.
Yeah.
Just to eat lower down in the food chain sometimes. You don't have to do it all the time, but you could make a change.
Yeah, that's something that we've been working on at home. My husband loves to cook meat. And my son loves to eat it. But we have really reduced, we've added more plant matter and less meat and more chicken and less beef and just little changes. I'm kind of agitating for slightly bigger changes, but my husband does most of the cooking, so I only have so much influence. Which I don't want to mess with that dynamic. So I don't want to.
Maybe you can also have an experiment with some of the fake meats out there, and a lot of foodies are really no, they're not going to do that. But if you sort of thought, well, it's not exactly beef, but it's something that's sort of like beef, and it's a new food that I can try,
I keep not telling my family.
That's sneaky.
Hoping that I can get alternative meats into them, thinking that it is meat, and they don't necessarily pick up on it right away, but they also don't chew. They're like, I don't really like it. So I need other plans, but we'll get there. Thank you so much.
Wow, this has been amazing.
This is awesome.
Yeah, and we're at AmazonWatch.org and Amazon Watch on Instagram and Facebook as well. Not that I want to promote them, but
I know. So and if somebody wanted to reach you because they wanted to make a large gift or something, would they look for you on LinkedIn or would they look for you on the Amazon Watch website?
Both. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn and Amazon Watch.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you, Rebecca. I love your podcast. It's so great.
Thank you. It's been so fun.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Yeah, absolutely. This was episode 3 of Badass Women in Climate with Amanda Moran. I want to thank my producer, Marcela Avramescu. And I am your host, Rebecca Pan. Thanks so much for listening. Tune in next time. Bye.